Welcome to History's Mysteries, a place where the echoes of the past linger in the quiet of night. Here, forgotten worlds awaken softly, and the stories of time unfold like dreams. So settle in, breathe deeply, and let history whisper you to sleep.
Sleep to history's mysteries. The lost continents. The world quiets around you as night settles in, and as your thoughts drift like distant tides against the darkened shore, we step softly into the half-remembered places of the earth. You breathe slowly, gently, letting the last traces of the day dissolve. The oceans deepen around us. The stars draw faint silver lines across the sky, and beneath that vastness lies a question as old as humanity itself. What vanished beneath the waves? What worlds were lost to time? Tonight we drift back, far back, into the silent waters of history's greatest mysteries. The lost continents, whispered in ancient texts and echoed in geological riddles, pull us into their quiet embrace. They are places that shimmer at the edge of memory, half myth, half possibility, suspended somewhere between science and dreams. They exist in that tranquil space where facts cradle legends, and where legends fall gently into the sea. Let your breathing settle into a soft rhythm. Let the mind loosen like soft sand under tide. We begin now, drifting across the surface of the world's forgotten lands. Far beneath the Atlantic Ocean, the water is still and old, colder than memory, darker than unlit caverns. Here lie the first whispers. Atlantis, Plato's voice, drifts through time like a quiet tide, telling of a grand island empire, rich in shining temples, wide avenues, and circular harbours carved with mathematical perfection. It was said to be larger than Libya and Asia combined, a jewel of the ancient world, until the sea claimed it in a single day and night of ruin. Imagine, for a moment, gliding silently above that deep ocean floor. The water stretches endlessly, a world without wind or wave in this nighttime calm. And somewhere far below, layered in silt and quiet darkness, may rest the faintest ghost of a world that once breathed. Stone pillars fallen like forgotten memories, pathways swallowed in shifting sand, the outlines of a city that may have lived only in story, or may have existed long before recorded time, when coastlines were younger and seas had not yet risen to swallow the world. Atlantis is the most famous of the lost continents, but it is only one dream among many. The earth has forgotten more shores than it remembers. Let your breath slow, like waves washing over worn stone. Far to the south, beyond the cold currents curling around Africa's edge, ancient sailors whispered of Lemuria, a continent stretching across the Indian Ocean, an ancestral homeland of forgotten peoples or vanished creatures. It was proposed in the days before plate tectonics, an attempt to explain mysteries of biology and migration, but its name lingered. Lemuria became a place not of science, but of imagination, lush, tropical, a cradle of early humanity, or lost civilizations whose temples now lie beneath coral and drifting sand. Some pictured it as swaying with emerald forests and rivers wide as seas. Others imagined tall white cities rising above turquoise lagoons. And in every imagining, Lemuria sank long before recorded memory, leaving only fragments in myths from India, Madagascar, Indonesia, and beyond. Now, imagine drifting above that warm sea. The moonlight rests over the water, like a thin sheet of silver. Beneath the surface, Shadows shift as if remembering shorelines. Long vanished volcanic ridges curl upward like the silhouettes of broken mountains. The ocean floor drops and rises in quiet patterns, hinting at the possibility that once, long ago, something vast stood here, kissed by sun and wind. You float, weightless, letting your thoughts move slowly, gently. But let us drift farther still to the Pacific, largest, deepest expanse of water on Earth, a world unto itself, a place of silence older than civilization. Here lie legends that predate even the oldest stone carvings, the stories of Mu, long before modern theories. Mystics and Victorian explorers spoke of a continent stretching across the Pacific, home to a sophisticated ancient people who built temples and monuments across what are now small scattered islands. Perhaps Hawaii, Tahiti, Rapa Nui, Easter Island were once mountaintops of a vast land swallowed by the sea. Perhaps the colossal Moai statues are not signs of isolation, but remnants of a culture connected by land that is now gone. As you drift deeper into calm, imagine following the currents toward Rapa Nui. The waves lap gently around giant stone faces staring eternally toward the horizon behind them. Green slopes rise, and beyond them, ocean. Only ocean. Yet the Polynesian stories speak of Hiva, their ancestral home, a great island or continent destroyed in a cataclysm. And as your mind wanders softly through the night, you may picture lush valleys, stone temples, terraces crawling up mountainsides, all now buried beneath an endless Pacific blue. The idea of Mu lingers, not because it is proven, but because it resonates with something deep in the human spirit, a desire to understand where we came from and what worlds existed before us. The ocean holds so many secrets, and silence is often mistaken for absence. Let your shoulders loosen. Let the quiet flow through you like a warm tide. Across the world, ancient maps and legends speak of lands now swallowed or shifted. When Earth's crust moved and changed, when ice sheets melted and seas rose by hundreds of feet, entire landscapes vanished Sundaland. Once a sprawling extension of Southeast Asia, was a vast, fertile region during the last ice age. Rivers wound through plains where now only the South China Sea lies. Human ancestors may have walked along great valleys and settled in coastal cities, now lost to the deep. Slowly, as the glaciers melted, the sea crept forward like a silent tide, filling riverbeds, covering forests, and turning mountains into islands. Indonesia, Malaysia, Borneo, and the Philippines are fragments of a world once whole, a world now hidden beneath warm tropical waters. Imagine traveling through these Pacific shallows in the soft night. The moon reveals faint shapes beneath the waves, ridges, plateaus, perhaps the outlines of ancient river channels. In the quiet of sleep, it is easy to imagine lights glowing faintly in the deep, lanterns of forgotten villages, or fires long extinguished, but remembered by the earth. Night deepens around us. We drift westward now, toward the Mediterranean, once far lower, carved by rivers flowing through what are now deep basins. When the Atlantic poured in millions of years ago, it transformed the landscape entirely. In this place of shifting seas and rising stones, some believed in the lost land of Tartessos, an ancient Iberian kingdom of silver and bronze, of traders and storytellers, swallowed by floods or earthquakes. Others imagined the long-lost island of Lyonesse off the coast of Britain, a land of saints and monasteries, drowned in a single night. Fishermen still tell of church bells ringing from beneath the waves. Whether myth or memory, such stories cling to coastlines everywhere, reminders that the sea slowly reclaims all things. Let your breathing soften, let the weight of the past settle into a gentle whisper. Toward the far north, beneath ice and shifting tectonic plates, lies the mystery of Hyperborea, an ancient land of eternal spring in the frozen realms beyond the north wind. It appears in Greek text as a paradise untouched by war or sorrow. Some equated it with lands that once lay ice-free during warm epochs. Others saw it as pure myth. But the Earth's climate has shifted many times, and there were ages when the Arctic was green, wrapped in forests and warm breezes. Beneath Greenland's ice sheet lies evidence of ancient vegetation, lakes, and flowing rivers. Worlds erased not by water, but by ice. When your mind rests in the darkness of night, it becomes easier to imagine that once, far above the world, there flourished a land of gentle sunlight and unending calm. And still we drift. South now, to the rim of the Pacific, where the Bering Land Bridge once connected Asia and America. A broad plain, now lost beneath frigid waters, may have supported entire cultures, scattered settlements, and the first human migrations into the New World. The wind that blows over the Bering Sea carries the faintest echo of footsteps across a land long gone. And farther still, beneath the cold waves of the North Sea, lies Doggerland, once the heart of Europe's prehistoric world. It stretched between Britain and Scandinavia, teeming with wildlife, forests, and human settlers. Then, slowly, the sea rose. A tsunami struck, and the land faded, leaving behind only fishing nets that occasionally drag up bones, tools, and fragments of a forgotten life. All across the world, the Earth has erased continents, not always through sudden catastrophe, but often through slow, gentle transformation, like a tide reshaping a shoreline grain by grain. Let your thoughts drift like these grains. Let the quiet carry you. The stories of lost continents are not simply tales of destruction, but reminders of how deeply the world has changed. Shorelines are temporary mountains rise and fall. Forests become seas. Seas become deserts. Civilizations blossom and wither. The earth is ancient, far older than memory, older than legend, older than the words we use to describe time itself. You float now in a world of possibility, imagining coastlines lit by torchlight, temples glowing beneath starlit skies, entire continents alive with cultures that vanished long before anything was written in stone. You drift, calm and weightless, through the stories the ocean keeps. The sea is vast, and so are the memories hidden beneath it. And as we continue this quiet journey toward the deepest, oldest mysteries the planet has ever known, we move ever closer to the edge where myth and history begin to blur, where the ether whispers drift through the deep like soft currents, moving through time as effortlessly as the tide. And as we descend again into that vastness of quiet ocean and forgotten worlds, your breathing stays slow and gentle, like the steady rhythm of waves washing over an ancient shore. Darkness below grows thicker, but it is not a frightening darkness. It is warm, familiar, like a blanket of time settling over the earth, hiding secrets too old for writing, too large for memory. We drift deeper, letting the ancient waters guide us into places long submerged, long silent. Somewhere in that stillness, there lies an understanding that the continents beneath our feet are not fixed things. They shift, they drift, they crumble, and sometimes they vanish entirely. Just as the mind sheds thoughts as it moves toward rest, so too does the earth shed landscapes, trading mountains for plains, shores for seas, land for water. Entire worlds are born, erased, and reborn again across millions of years, each one slipping quietly into the next like a dream, fading into another dream. We drift now towards Zealandia, one of the most extraordinary lost continents of all. Unlike Atlantis, Mu, or Lemuria, Zealandia is not legend but geological truth. Almost the size of Australia, it lies submerged beneath the Pacific Ocean, with only the mountain peaks visible today, as New Zealand, New Caledonia, and a few scattered islands. For millions of years, it rose and fell with tectonic breath. Then, long ago, the sea gently swept across it, leaving only fragments above water. Imagine hovering above its drowned surface. The moonlight paints a soft silver glow across the waves. Beneath them lies a vast plateau, carved by rivers that have not run for tens of millions of years. There are valleys deep enough to hold entire mountain ranges, and mountains tall enough to once have scraped the sky. But all of it now rests under the weight of the ocean, a continent hiding in plain sight, a reminder that even the land we know today can slip quietly into the sea. You breathe softly, drifting. The water grows calm around us. To the west, beneath the Bay of Bengal, lies another mystery, the rumoured lost land of Kumari Kandam. In Tamil tradition, it was said to be a cradle of ancient civilization, a great southern continent connecting India to Antarctica. Modern geology tells another story, yet the legend persists in the hearts of millions. A tale of a land once filled with poets, scholars, and sages. Like many lost worlds, it may carry memories of real ancient floods, coastal plains drowned by rising seas after the last ice age, villages swallowed slowly as the shoreline crept inland. Imagine walking along a prehistoric coast where families once lived, where fires once burned, where waves once washed against soil, now hundreds of feet below the modern ocean. As the water rose, inch by inch, year by year, the land receded. Stories remained. Over time, the stories became legend, and legends became the lost continent of Kumari Kandam. The earth is shaped not only by mountains and seas, but also by memory, and memory changes shape as gently as waves smoothing stone. We drift now toward the middle of the Indian Ocean, where the seafloor reveals scars, ridges, plateaus, and sunken fragments of an ancient world. Beneath the Mauritius waters lies evidence of a lost microcontinent called Mauritia, hidden beneath layers of volcanic rock and coral. Long before humans walked the earth, Mauritia split and sank beneath the waves, leaving only Madagascar, India, and tiny island chains as hints of its existence. It had no cities, no temples, no people, but its disappearance shows how easily even whole continents can vanish, leaving only geological whispers behind. Let your shoulders relax, your breath slow and deep. The world grows quieter, softer, more distant. Around us, the planet's history stretches far beyond human memory. There were times when Earth's land masses were assembled into supercontinents, Pangaea, Gondwana, Laurasia, vast sweeping realms where deserts stretched from horizon to horizon, and forests ran unbroken across thousands of miles. But before these giants rose, others existed, Rodinia, Columbia, Nuna, each forming, breaking, drifting, and dissolving into oceans that have long since changed shape. Imagine watching continents move as if in slow motion, You stand on ancient stone while mountains rise like long, soft breaths of the earth's seas melt away. Rivers carve new paths, valleys deepen, islands drift apart. Everything shifts so slowly that it feels motionless, yet over millions of years, entire worlds rearrange themselves. This is the Earth's quiet truth. Continents are momentary arrangements in an ocean of time. And yet, even against this immense backdrop, human stories cling tightly to vanished lands. We hear echoes of them in Polynesian chants, in Greek philosophy, in Indian epics, in Egyptian priestly tales, and in medieval legends whispered across coastlines. Many cultures speak of lands taken by the sea, sometimes in violent storms, sometimes in gentle rises that unfolded over generations. These stories may not be literal histories, but they capture something true about humanity. That people remember the sea moving, rising, swallowing land. They remember coasts that no longer exist. They remember migrations forced by tides. And over thousands of years, these memories become mythic continents, lost to all but the imagination. Let your mind drift through this tapestry of ancient memory. Let it unravel gently, like mist over a calm morning shore. The Mediterranean hides traces of Bronze Age settlements drowned by earthquakes and shifting coastlines. The Black Sea may have once been a freshwater lake until the ocean broke through, flooding entire valleys. In Japan, sunken ruins off Yonaguni resemble stepped pyramids, carved by nature, perhaps, or shaped by early humans whose world was slowly overtaken by water. Off the coast of India, near Dwarka, divers found stone structures covered in coral, hinting at settlements older than recorded civilization. Everywhere the sea touches land, the sea eventually takes it back. We drift west again toward the Atlantic. Beneath the waters near the Bahamas lie the Bimini Road, rectangular stones arranged in a pattern that some believe are remnants of an ancient civilization. More likely they are natural formations, but even so, their shape invites the imagination to wander. And imagination is part of what keeps lost continents alive. As you breathe softly, the story continues to unfold like a gentle tide. The Azores rise from a deep Atlantic ridge where volcanic mountains push through the sea. Some believe these islands were once peaks of a larger landmass. Ancient maps drawn before the discovery of the Americas showed phantom islands dotting this ocean. Antillia, Brazil, High Brazil, lands that sailors insisted they saw, even if no one could ever find them again. Perhaps they were tricks of light upon the water, perhaps they were misremembered coastlines, or perhaps, long ago when sea levels were lower, these places truly existed above the waves. As night wraps its calm around your thoughts, you drift through these possibilities without needing answers. The beauty of lost continents lies not in proving them, but in wondering about them. Far to the south, Antarctica itself may guard ancient landscapes buried beneath miles of ice, mountain ranges, valleys, and maybe lakes untouched for millions of years. There were ages when this icy world was covered in forests, where warm breezes carried moisture across a land now locked in frozen silence. Beneath its glaciers may rest fossils of unknown species, traces of climates long forgotten. Antarctica was once part of Gondwana, connected to Australia, Africa, India, South America. When these continents tore apart, Antarctica moved southward, slowly freezing into its modern stillness. Imagine that slow drift, the land becoming colder and quieter, the forests withering, the final rivers freezing into silence, the continent turning to ice, carrying inside it the memory of warm, ancient worlds now completely lost. You sink deeper into calm, and from these geological secrets, we return once more to the human stories, the legends that keep the world's imagination alive. For even if Atlantis never existed as a physical place, it exists as an idea, a reminder of fragility, of knowledge lost, of civilizations that rise and fall like tides. Lemuria symbolizes migration, the mystery of origins, the yearning to understand where humanity began. Mu represents the vastness of the Pacific and the deep time woven into island cultures. Kumari Kandam reflects ancient flood memories and the shifting of coastlines over millennia. All these stories are maps, not of land, but of longing. As you drift, the world grows softer around you. Thoughts slow, breathing settles. The continents of the earth fade into silhouettes beneath a dark ocean sky. Even if no ancient advanced civilizations existed on these lost continents, the planet is full of forgotten worlds, real landscapes that vanished beneath rising seas as the Ice Age ended. Entire regions the size of countries now lie underwater, filled with the remains of forests, plains, and possibly the footprints of people who lived close to the shifting shores. Wherever the ocean is deep, there is the possibility of what once was. Let your mind wander to the depths now, as though floating above the world in a gentle, timeless drift. The ocean is a vast library, its shelves made of stone, its pages written in layers of sediment. It keeps its stories locked beneath pressure and darkness, giving only subtle hints. A fossil lifted from the seabed, a submerged forest, a forgotten coastline revealed by sonar. The earth holds more history than we can ever uncover, and more mysteries than we can ever solve. You drift now through the last currents of the story, carried by slow, rhythmic waves. The lost continents around you fade into silhouettes, quiet and unreachable, but comforting in their mystery. They remind us that the world is not static. It is alive, constantly shifting, constantly remembering and forgetting. The ocean hums softly, its surface smooth beneath the moonlit sky. Somewhere far below, untouched for ages, lie the remnants of landscapes we will never fully map, mountains worn by time, valleys deepened by ancient rivers, shorelines erased long before the first human drew breath. The earth is ancient, and we are only passing through its memories. And as the story settles into silence, you remain weightless, calm, drifting between the known and the unknown. There is no urgency here, no need for answers, only the soft comfort of possibility, of imagining worlds hidden just beyond reach. The continents that once were and may never be again rest beneath the sea in eternal quiet, but in your mind they drift on, glowing faintly like lanterns carried across dark waters, guiding you toward rest. You exhale slowly. The night deepens, the waves still. The lost continents fade into peaceful darkness, and you drift gently, softly, into sleep. Earth's forgotten continents whisper softly from the depths. The silent cathedrals of time, abandoned temples of forgotten faiths. By the time the world forgot the gods, their houses were already crumbling. Stone gives way slowly, more slowly than memory, so that the last worshipper may die centuries before the last column falls. Wind and rain go on whispering the names no one speaks, polishing the steps no one climbs. In that interval, between the fading of a faith and the collapse of its last sanctuary, something strange happens. Temples become cathedrals of time. I did not set out to find them. At least, that is what I said to myself the first night, when the airplane window showed a black ocean and a thin curve of moon, and the engine's hum merged with the ache behind my eyes. I told friends that I was doing research on comparative religion, on the archaeology of forgotten cults. It sounded polite, academic, respectable, but the truth is that I was tired. Tired of quick opinions and faster vanishing headlines, of gods that lasted 3 seasons of a streaming show and then were replaced. Tired of the way even the great religions, the living ones, were argued over like brands. Somewhere under that weariness was an impulse I could not quite name, a need to listen to something older than the noise. So I followed rumors, footnotes, and half-legible translations. I followed the way a strange name glows on a page, the way embers glow in ashes. I followed flights and buses and dirt roads, until one morning the sun hauled itself over a desert horizon, and I saw the first of the silent cathedrals. It rose from the plateau like a piece of dawn that had hardened into stone. From a distance the temple looked simple. 4 square walls and a flat roof, all of it carved from a pale glass-sheened rock that caught the light and scattered it. Up close, the simplicity dissolved into intricacy. Every surface was etched with lines so fine they were almost invisible. Rays, arcs, spirals, intersecting at strange angles. At first I thought of stars, then of something older than stars. My guide, a taciturn man in a sand-colored scarf, stopped the jeep a respectful distance from the ruins. "We go on foot," he said. "Road ends here." And he searched for a word in English. "Voices." "What kind of voices?" I asked. He lifted one shoulder. "Place remembers. Some people hear it, some do not." His eyes flicked to mine. "You're the kind who hears, I think." The air tasted of dust and light. Heat was already uncoiling off the ground. The wind was cool and carried a faint metallic tang, like old coins. As we walked, the temple shifted subtly with each step, its edges blurring, like something seen underwater. Mirages wobbled on the horizon, but this structure remained unnervingly clear, unnervingly present. Up close, I saw that the entrance was a low, narrow slit, no taller than my shoulder. Above it, carved into the stone lintel, was a symbol, a circle broken in 3 places, with a tiny inverted triangle at its heart. "You know the name of this place?" I asked my guide. "It has no name," he said. "Or rather, too many. The old stories." He waved a hand. "Sky Temple, House of the First Light, Shrine of the Goddess who turned away." People tell stories when they see something they do not understand. "You don't believe any of them?" He thought about it. "I believe the stone. It is older than the stories. Stories follow stone, not the other way." Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. The light, instead of fading, seemed to thicken, turning the air into something like pale honey. The hall beyond the entrance was narrow and long, its walls converging toward a point of brightness at the far end. My footsteps sounded small and disrespectful. Thin grooves ran along the floor, so shallow they were almost smooth. Where they met the walls, the etchings there flared into cascades of lines that curved around each other in dedications to geometry I could not read. It's like a sundial, I murmured, tracing one line with my fingertip. The stone felt unexpectedly warm, as if heat were running inside it like blood. But inside, underground. Not a sundial, said a voice from the shadows ahead. At least, not for this sun. I started so violently I almost fell. My guide merely inclined his head, as though he had been expecting this. A man stepped out from the bright haze at the end of the hall. He wore clothes that could have been taken from any era, a plain dark coat, trousers tucked into scuffed boots, a wide-brimmed hat whose shape refused to settle on a century. There was nothing remarkable about his face, except that, like his clothes, it would not stay still in my mind. Every time I looked away and back, I was sure he had been younger, or older, or differently shaped around the eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, heart still thudding. I was told no one lived out here." "No one does," he said. "I only keep watch." He extended a hand. "You can call me the keeper, if it helps." "Of what?" I asked automatically. "Of dust, of stories, of the places in between." His hand was warm and dry, his grip both firm and oddly weightless, as though he might drift away if I let go. "You've come to listen, haven't you?" I hesitated. "To learn, perhaps." "Learning is a species of listening," he said. "Come." We walked together down the narrowing hall. My guide stayed at the entrance, muttering something under his breath that might have been a prayer. The grooves in the floor deepened, and the lines on the walls grew denser, overlapping until they formed a shimmering lattice that hurt my eyes. "There was a faith here once," the keeper said conversationally. "They had no word for God, only for the one who was before. They believed the sky was a wound in the body of the universe, and that light was blood spilling through." "That's vivid," I said. "They were vivid people. They measured that blood with great care." He touched the wall with his fingertips, and for an instant the lines around his hand flared, like embers stirred by a breath. "They carved the paths of suns you've never seen. They charted the turning of stars that were old when this planet was gas and fire. Time for them was not a river, but a cathedral. Rooms within rooms, all resonant at different frequencies. This place," his hand described a small arc taking in the hall, the temple, the blazing sky beyond, "was their tuning fork." We reached the far end of the hall. Instead of a sanctum or altar, there was a circular chamber open to the sky. The roof had been cut away, or perhaps it had never existed. Walls rose in a smooth curve, their surfaces carved with spiraling grooves that all led upward, converging on the ragged circle of blue. In the center of the floor, a shallow basin of the same glass-like stone held a faint trace of darkness, like a shadow that had run out of substance. There were no statues, no offerings, no relics. "They worshipped time?" I asked. "In a sense." The keeper tilted his head back, eyes half closed against the glare. "They worshipped the before, the possibility that what came first still vibrates through what came after, that by listening just right, they could hear the first note." "And did they?" He smiled faintly. "For a while. Every faith hears its God for a while. That is how faith survives its birth. But there are no temples in this world whose worshippers do not eventually stop listening. The miracle is not that faiths die." He touched the basin with the back of his knuckles. "It is that their houses remain, long enough to remember for them." A gust of wind swept into the chamber, bringing with it the smell of far-off rain. For an instant, the basin darkened, and I thought I saw movement there. Not a reflection of the sky, but of something deeper. A skyscape in which the stars were arranged in unfamiliar constellations, an ink-blue firmament streaked with slow, luminous rivers. Then the wind passed, and the illusion with it. What happened to them? I asked. People who built this place? What happens to all such people? The keeper said softly. The sky changed, slowly, then all at once. The wound shifted. Blood fell differently. Their measurements ceased to match the world. They had poured themselves into this tuning fork, and the note it gave back no longer fit. Some tried to adjust. Some clung to the old patterns, insisting the sky was wrong, not they. Some walked out into the desert and followed the receding constellations until they died of thirst, still counting. And the temple? The stone stayed. Long after the last believer lay forgotten in the sand, the grooves remained. The walls continued to sing in the language of a sky that no longer existed. He opened his hands as if balancing invisible weights. No one listened, and yet time listened. It always does. That is when these places become what they are now, the silent cathedrals. Silent? I echoed. It doesn't feel silent. He glanced at me. You hear them then? What are they saying? That depends on who you are when you arrive, he said, and who you will be when you leave. We stood together in the strange, cool light, listening to something that was not exactly sound. It was like feeling the pulse in your wrist, a rhythm that had always been there, but which you notice only when you stop and pay attention. Images rose unbidden in my mind. Generations kneeling on this stone, eyes raised to a long-gone sky, hands tracing grooves into rock with patient tools, a child pressing her ear to the basin to hear the echo of stars. The feeling was not reverence so much as recognition. The people who had prayed here were gone, their God silent, their sky replaced. The hunger that had built this temple, the hunger to locate themselves in something vast and enduring, felt familiar. After some unmeasured time, the keeper touched my elbow. Come, he said, there are other cathedrals. Time is patient, but your body is not. You will need food, water, sleep. You're coming with me? I asked. For a while, until we reached the next one. His smile was wry. Besides, you may not find them without me. They do not appear on maps the way you think. On the drive back, my guide muttered about spirits and omens, and kindly but firmly refused my offer of extra payment if he would agree to take us to the second site. This is as far as I go, he said, hand tightening on the steering wheel. If you want more old stones, talk to your friend. My friend. I turned, but the keeper, who had sat in the jeep's shadow and spoken quietly with me moments before, was nowhere to be seen. Desert stretched unbroken on every side, shimmering with heat. He left, my guide said with a shrug. People like that, they come and go. You will see him again, if you're meant to. I almost protested that no one could have walked away into that open vastness without kicking up dust or leaving footprints. Instead, I closed my mouth, buckled my seatbelt, and watched the tempo recede in the rearview mirror. The sun climbed higher, turning the pale stone into a white flame against the sky. And then it was gone. For a time, my life seemed to resume its usual shape. There were hotel rooms and flights, emails and receipts, snippets of ordinary conversation. The memory of the desert temple faded at the edges, like a vivid dream. But I noticed myself pausing longer than necessary in museums, lingering in the rooms devoted to unknown cult, 3rd century BCE, or ritual object, culture undetermined. I found my eyes tracing the cracks in old statues, wondering what vibrations still lived in their stone. It was in a museum, in fact, that I saw the second cathedral. It was not the cathedral itself, of course, but lay many thousands of miles away, in a jungle I had never imagined visiting. It was a fragment, a borrowed piece, set behind glass with a neat label. Carved stone panel. Provenance: unknown river valley civilization, predating regional records. Symbolic imagery suggests ritual significance. The panel was no larger than a laptop screen, its edges worn and chipped. It showed a stylized archway surmounted by coiling vines, and beyond it a series of steps descending into waves. Above the arch, etched in delicate lines, was the same broken circle I had seen over the desert temple's door. Only here, the inverted triangle at its heart had been replaced with a tiny curling spiral. A small note at the bottom of the placard read, "Similar motifs found at submerged temple complex. Coordinates on file with research department." I stood there long enough that a security guard ambled over to ask if I was alright. "Fine," I said, but my voice sounded distant to my own ears. Could you tell me where these coordinates are? The submerged complex?" He gestured toward the help desk. "Ask there, but I doubt they'll give you that kind of information." They did not. The woman at the desk smiled apologetically and spoke of preservation, safety, the need for permits. I nodded and thanked her, and later that night, in the quiet of my hotel room, I searched for the fragment succession number in academic databases. There were papers, of course there were papers, discussing the river enclosure site, its puzzling isolation, its curious iconography. There were also, buried deeper, references to a certain independent consultant who sometimes appeared in field reports under titles like temporal site verification or non-standard chronology assessment. The name listed was not the keeper, of course, but the initials were the same. By that point, I was no longer pretending, even to myself, that I had stumbled into this. When you have heard a stone sing, you do not return easily to silence. The jungle was nothing like the desert, and yet they shared a certain density of time. In the desert, time lay exposed, flat and immense, unrumpled by foliage. In the jungle it grew in layers, leaf over leaf, vine over branch, fallen tree over stone. Every inch of ground seemed occupied by roots or rot or new growth, and the air hummed with insects and hidden birds. The boat that carried me upriver was a narrow wooden thing, its small engine coughing now and then in protest. The water was the color of old copper, opaque and slow-moving, carrying leaves, twigs, and the occasional startled fish. The local guide this time was a woman, older than my desert companion, her face cross-hatched with fine lines. She did not speak English, but she watched me with curious, amused eyes. We had been traveling for several hours when the river widened and the current slackened. The guide cut the engine and let the boat drift. Ahead, the water swirled around something that broke the surface, the corner of a stone block, slick with algae, its top just barely visible. "Altar," the guide said, tapping the stone with her paddle. Then she pointed beyond it, to where the river darkened, House below. A submerged temple lay entirely beneath the waterline, a drowned structure whose outlines could only be guessed at from the way the current moved. Here the river ran strangely cool, and when I trailed my fingers over the side, I felt not the solid resistance of expected depth, but an almost dizzying drop, as if the riverbed had fallen away into a chasm. I stared into the brown-green water, focusing past the reflections of clouds until shapes began to emerge. Steps worn by countless feet descending into darkness, columns wrapped in trailing plants, carved reliefs of human figures, their faces eroded but their gestures intact, hands raised, not upward, but outward toward the river itself. Goddess of the flood? I guessed aloud. The guide shook her head, lips pulling back in something that was almost a smile and almost a grimace. New goddess, she said slowly, searching for a word. Door? The river was a door. The temple was a hinge. The faithful had not come to appease some personified spirit of the water. They had come to slide open a passage between states. This much I could feel, and the way the hairs on my arms rose and the boat drifted over the submerged stairs. You won't see much from here, said a voice at my shoulder. The river is shy in the daytime. I did not start as violently as I had in the desert. Some part of me had been listening for that voice since I first saw the stone panel in the museum. You're late, I said without turning. Time is difficult to measure in places like this, the keeper replied. When I looked at him, he was sitting cross-legged in the stern of the boat, hat tipped back, bare feet trailing in the water. His coat was gone. He wore a short-sleeved shirt whose fabric clung damply to his arms. Beads of moisture glittered on his skin like tiny pearls. Besides, the river likes to decide these things. The guide did not appear to notice him. She sat at the bow, paddle resting across her knees, humming under her breath. Is she... I began. She sees enough, the keeper said. Not in the way you do, not in the way I do, but she has ferried archaeologists and pilgrims up this river for many years. She knows where it folds. Folds? He dipped his hand in the water, making small ripples. Do you know how cloth bends when you gather it? Time does that too. Certain acts, repeated with enough belief, enough attention, can pinch the fabric of years. Shrines are often built at such pinches. Every prayer, every offering, tightens the fold, drawing different eras closer, until... He snapped his fingers lightly. You have a place where moments seep between centuries, very useful for those who wish to speak with their dead, or their gods, or their unborn descendants. And when no one comes anymore... Ah, he smiled. And the fold does not simply straighten. It cannot. It is knotted now, like muscle grown around an old wound. The shrine falls silent, but the bend remains. Such places are resonant. Time eats its own tail there, in small, strange ways. We drifted over the submerged stairs again. This time, as I gazed down, the brown-green murk cleared for a heartbeat. I saw not just steps and shadows, but flickers of movement. People in garments woven from reeds, bearing clay jars. A procession of children scattering flower petals into the current. A woman with braided hair kneeling on the lowest step, arms spread as if to embrace the water. For an instant, her eyes rose to meet mine, and they held a grief so vast it cracked something in my chest. Then a leaf bumped against the side of the boat. The water clouded, and the vision dissolved. Did you see that? I whispered. Yes, the keeper said quietly. Who was she? Once, she was their doorkeeper. She knew the currents by taste, the moods of the river by the way it curved around her knees. When the tides of their history turned, she stood here and watched their world drown. There was nothing she could sacrifice that would have stopped it. The flood was not a god's wrath or a moral lesson. It was an upstream glacier melting, a tectonic plate shuddering, and yet, because she was keeper of the door, she felt responsible. She still feels responsible, I said, my throat tight. Time does not forgive as easily as you think, he said. It does not punish either. It simply remembers, and in remembering, it holds certain gestures in place. The guide spoke then, in rapid phrases I could not follow, and pointed toward the shore. A tangle of roots and moss there concealed a narrow opening, a dark slit in the river bank. Side door, the keeper said. Come. The cave was damp, close, dripping with the slow patience of minerals. We walked single file, our flashlights picking out glistening stone formations and pale blind insects. The air smelled of earth, something else, a faint metallic tang, as if the river's blood had seeped into the rock. The passage widened abruptly into a cavern, whose ceiling was strung with stalactites, like petrified fangs. The floor sloped gently down toward a still pool. Its surface was so smooth it might have been stone, but when I stepped closer, I saw my reflection shiver. Around the pool's rim, set into the rock, were carvings, the same archway motif I'd seen on the museum panel, repeated and varied. Some arches opened onto stylized waves, others onto curling clouds, others onto blankness. This, said the keeper, was their inner temple. Here they made their exchanges. Exchanges? Memories for omens, promises for postponements. You would call it prayer, they called it bargaining. I knelt at the edge of the pool. In its still depths, the reflection of the cave roof seemed impossibly far away, as if the water opened into a vertical shaft rather than a shallow basin. When I reached out, intending to test its depth, the keeper's hand closed gently around my wrist. Careful, he said. This place is not as abandoned as it looks. As if to confirm that, a drop of water fell from a stalactite and hit the pool with a soft plink. Rings spread outward, distorting my reflection. For an instant, I saw not my own face, but a rapid sequence of others. A man with ritual scars across his cheeks, a girl with hair braided in riverine patterns, an old woman whose eyes were filmed with cataracts, but whose gaze still burned. Are those the worshippers? I asked, shaking. In a way, the keeper released my wrist. Little echoes, trapped in the knot of time here. When you remember someone intensely, you bind them into your personal past. When enough people remember together, they carve a kind of channel through time. And those people are gone, but the place remains. The channel can fill with reflections. Ghosts, I said, if you like, but not in the sense of spirits with unfinished business. Think of them as habits of memory the world itself has developed. These are places where time remembers how it was used. I thought of the river temple, visible only as broken outlines beneath the surface, of the woman on the steps, whose grief still vibrated in my bones. Why show me this? I whispered. Why are you bringing me to these cathedrals? The keeper crouched beside me. The pool's dim light picked out small lines around his eyes that I did not recall seeing before. Because you are listening, he said. Because you're tired of noise and hungry for the deeper hum beneath it. Because there is a danger in forgetting that everything you think is permanent will one day be a drowned stare or a desert groove, and yet the imprint of your gestures will endure. Because some stories are only complete when someone agrees to carry them forward, not as dogma, but as understanding. He dipped 2 fingers into the water. For a moment the pool darkened, and in its depths I saw, not the past, but something that might have been the future. The same river, narrower, its banks choked with plastic and rusting metal, skyscrapers rising in the hazy distance, a small child peering into a muddy puddle between broken concrete slabs, her expression filled with the same aching curiosity I had felt in the desert temple. Then the vision passed. This is the 2nd cathedral, the keeper said softly. There will be others. There is a monastery in the mountains that erased its own scriptures. There is a city underneath a city where every faith burned itself into frescoes no one can read. There is a temple above the clouds, and one below the ice. And you keep them all? I asked. I visit, he said. I listen. I speak when someone comes with the right kind of questions. Call it keeping, if you like. Time does not need a custodian, but humans often do. He rose and held out a hand. You are not done yet. The path is long. As I took his hand and let him lead me back through the dripping cave, the sense of walking, not just through space, but through a thickening weave of years, settled around me like a cloak. The silent cathedrals of time were not just ruins. They were mirrors in which my own era, my own restless, distracted age, might someday be reflected as a faint, shimmering image. Somewhere in an unimaginable future, a stranger might press their hand to a cracked screen or fragment of printed page and feel a faint echo of our questions. The thought was both humbling and strangely comforting. When we emerged from the cave into the blind white glare of day, the river roared past as if it had never paused. The guide shaded her eyes, looked at me and nodded once, as if something had been decided. You are not the first to come, the keeper said, and you will not be the last. Time is generous with its invitations, even if most people decline without knowing they were asked. How many more are there? I asked. His smile held both mischief and sorrow. Enough. We boarded the boat. The current took us, carrying us back towards settlements and roads and the thin skein of Wi-Fi that stitched the modern world together. But I felt as though a deeper current had caught me, one that flowed not just from upriver to downriver, but from before to after, from forgotten to not yet known. The silent cathedrals were waiting, their stones patient, their drowned steps steady under the weight of water. Somewhere in mountain air or city dust, other forgotten faiths had left their houses standing, not to demand worship, but to offer remembrance. I did not yet know their names, but time and the keeper would show me. And so the journey went on. The mountains greeted me with thin air and a silence that felt sharper than any I had known in desert or jungle. On the map, the region was a tangle of contour lines and sparse place names, a high range straddling the border between languages, between climates, between histories. Travelers came here to climb, to trek, to stand on ridges and take photographs of themselves against distant peaks. Very few came for the monastery that lay tucked in a side valley, several days' journey from the nearest marked trail. By then, I had learned that the world's forgotten sanctuaries seldom appeared where brochures suggested. The path up to the monastery wound through forests of stunted pines and over scree slopes, where every step sent small avalanches of stones clattering into the ravine below. My guide this time was a wiry young man with a calm smile and a habit of humming tunelessly under his breath. He had never heard of the place I described, but when I showed him my hand-drawn map, a composite of hints from old journals, expedition reports, and a half-deciphered inscription from a museum cellar, his eyes widened. My grandfather spoke of such a place, he said. The monastery that turned its back on the world. He said the monks there erased their own words. I thought it only a story to frighten children into finishing their lessons. We camped in the last scraps of tree line, where the wind combed the grass in restless waves. Stars came out in brittle, dazzling profusion. It was too cold for many insects, and the quiet was so complete that the crackle of the campfire sounded like distant thunder. I lay awake long after my guide's breathing had settled into the slow rhythm of sleep. Above me, the Milky Way arched like a pale scar across the sky. I thought of the desert temples' vanished constellations, of the river's remembered rituals, and wondered what kind of wound or healing had taken place in the monastery we were approaching. "You are closer than you think," said a voice from the darkness. I turned my head. The keeper sat at the edge of the firelight, hat in his hands, boots dusted with a thin sheen of frost. The light from the embers painted hollows under his cheekbones, and his eyes reflected the flames in pinpoints of gold. "You never seem to be out of breath," I said, "or hungry, or tired." "I get what I need in other places," he said, "not in ways you would find comforting." He tilted his head back to regard the stars. "This is a good sky. It belongs to more than one faith." "What do you mean?" "Think of all the pilgrims who walked under it," he said. "Followers of mountain gods and sun gods, hermits and poets, saints and skeptics, men and women who climbed these paths with hearts full of prayers, and others who simply came seeking a quiet hour away from the noise below. They all looked up. They all saw these stars. Whatever names they gave that experience, the light itself was common currency." "And the monastery?" I asked. "What did they see?" "For a long time, too long perhaps, they saw only their own reflections," he said. "Come, sleep if you can. Tomorrow you will see what's left." Morning was a slow unfurling of light over peaks and ridges. We packed our tent with numb fingers and set out along a narrow path that clung to the mountainside like a thought that would not fully form. The air grew thinner with each step, and my breath came in short, painful pulls. Then the trail rounded a shoulder of rock, and the monastery revealed itself. It clung to the cliff face as if grown from it, a cluster of stone buildings with sloping roofs, their wooden beams silvered with age. A long stairway, partly carved into the rock and partly constructed from rough-hewn blocks, led up to a heavy wooden gate. Colourful prayer flags once stretched from the roofs to poles sunk into the cliff, but time and weather had shredded them into faint, faded streamers. As we approached, my guide slowed, then stopped altogether. "I will not go further," he said, eyes fixed on the gate. "This place has a feeling. I do not like it." "You believe the stories your grandfather told, then?" I asked. "I believe my bones," he said simply. "They say no." I will wait here. If you do not return by sunset, I will go down and speak your name at the village shrine." "Is that a blessing?" I asked, attempting a smile. "It is whatever you need it to be," he replied gravely. I left him there and climbed the steps alone. Each one felt slightly different in height, as if they had been carved by many hands over many years, each mason making subtle adjustments based on his own stride. The air smelled of stone dust and old incense. The gate stood ajar. There was no lock, no chain, no sign forbidding entry. Only an absence, as if the building itself had drawn in a breath and never let it go. I stepped inside. The courtyard was larger than I'd expected, framed by cloistered walkways and low buildings. Empty flagpoles rattled softly in the wind. The well sat at its center, its stone lip worn smooth beyond the far wall. The night winds reared up, staggering in their indifference. This was not always an abandoned place, the keeper said, appearing beside the well, as if he had stepped out of my shadow. His breath did not smoke in the cold air. Mine did. "I gathered that much," I said. "They were devout, you know," he went on. "Devout in the way only those convinced of their own smallness can be. Their faith taught that words were traps, that to name the divine was to limit it. And so they praised their god in paradoxes and silence, in gestures and patterns. For centuries, this worked very well." We walked along the cloister. The walls were painted with murals, but at first glance they seemed nothing more than foggy smears of grey, brown, and faded blue. Figures emerged only when I looked closely. Kneeling monks, mountain spirits, stylized flames. All of them had been partially obscured by later brushstrokes of white, as if someone had tried to erase the images without quite succeeding. "What happened?" I asked. "The same thing that happens to any system devoted to purity," the keeper said quietly. "They turned inward. They began to fear contamination, not from enemies or outsiders, but from their own thoughts. Each time someone tried to articulate a teaching, another would point out the limitation in those words. Each attempt to praise their god was discovered to be inadequate, insulting even once examined. They became obsessed with erasing their own mistakes." He gestured toward the murals. "These are not the work of iconoclasts from outside. This is the work of the monks themselves. They painted their vision of heaven, then repented for having dared to depict it, and covered it in white. They wrote hymns, then burned them for having presumed to describe the indescribable." We entered a long hall whose walls were lined with shelves. At least they had once been. Now most of the shelves were empty, their wood carved with shallow repetitive grooves, where scrolls or books had once rested. A few scraps of parchment lay scattered on the floor, their ink washed into illegibility by water or time. Eventually, the keeper said, they ceased creating and devoted themselves entirely to uncreating. They studied their own archives only to hunt for error. When they found what they deemed a dangerous phrase, they scraped it off the page and carefully recorded the act of scraping in another volume, which they would later also condemn as presumptuous and destroy. They saw this as a kind of holy pruning. They believed that if they removed every impure thought, what remained would be pure awareness. "What remained?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He spread his hands toward the empty shelves. "This. They succeeded more completely than they intended. Their books are gone, their paintings obscured, their music forgotten. The last generation left behind detailed instructions for erasing even their own names. And yet the monastery stands, I said. Yes. He looked at me with something like pride. For all their efforts to disentangle themselves from history, they left a very clear imprint on time. Their devotion to erasure became, ironically, the most indelible part of their legacy. That is why this place is one of the cathedrals. I ran my fingers over the nearest shell. The grooves in the wood felt oddly familiar, like an echo of the desert temple's lines and the river shrine's arches. Do they haunt it? I asked. The monks? Not in the way you mean. He led me to the far end of the hall, where a single book remained on a pedestal, wrapped in rotting cloth. Their ghosts are not personalities, but practices watch. He did not touch the book. Instead, he blew gently across its surface. Dust rose like smoke, swirling in the slanting light from a high window. For a moment, the particles hung in the air in patterns. Letters, words, sentences in a script I did not recognize. They seemed to form, hesitate, and then, as if ashamed of their own daring, disperse. Even now, the keeper murmured, the habit of erasure persists. This building has a reflex against being pinned down. Is there anything left of what they believed? I asked. Any trace of their god, their teachings? He thought for a long moment. They believed that the divine was what remained when you let go of every image, every idea, every story, he said at last. In that sense, their God is everywhere there is silence, here especially. We stood and listened. The silence was not empty. It was dense with things unsaid, with words that had once hung in the air and been carefully disassembled. It felt like standing in a library after a great fire, the phantom of knowledge lingering like heat on the walls. In that silence, I heard, faintly, the murmuring of my own age, the constant production of commentary, the endless stream of opinions, the fear of missing a moment, a trend, a phrase. For a heartbeat, I felt a fierce kinship with those monks, their longing to carve away the unnecessary to reveal something essential beneath. But I also saw their mistake. In their zeal to purify, they had cut themselves away not only from error, but from relationship. Their faith had become a mirror turned on itself until it reflected nothing at all. That is why it is valuable as a cathedral, the keeper said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. Not because they were right or wrong, but because they show one way a human longing can twist when taken to its extreme. Time remembers such experiments. We left the hall and climbed a narrow stair to the rooftop. From there, the view was staggering. Mountains rising in serried ranks, valleys dropping away into blue haze, the sky an immense translucent bowl overhead. Wind tugged at my clothes and slipped cold fingers into my hair. Once, they came up here to watch the dawn, the keeper said. They believed that if they could greet the first light without a single word arising in their minds, they would be free of all illusions. Did anyone succeed? I asked. He smiled. You tell me. We stood together as a cloud parted, and a shaft of sunlight slid across a distant peak, igniting it in gold. For a moment, all the stories fell away. Desert temples and drowned shrines, erased scriptures and coming ruins. There was only light on rock, and the thin, sweet sting of air in my lungs. No words came, or rather many did, but they felt redundant. The experience was already complete. After a long time, the keeper spoke again. You see, even here, in the ruins of their excess, there is something to learn. Not as a dogma, but as a perspective. These places remember not only their builders' mistakes, but their glimpses of understanding. Is that why you call them cathedrals? I asked. I rarely call them anything, he said. You were the one who named them that, in your notes after the desert temple. Silent cathedrals of time. I liked the phrase. I stared at him. You read my notes? He shrugged. You leave them in places easy to find, on screens, in notebooks, in the backs of your thoughts. Time has a way of catching such things. His expression softened. Names matter. They shape how you attend to the world. You could have called these ruins dead religions or failed cults. You chose cathedrals of time. That tells me something about what you're ready to hear. And what is that? I asked. That you're beginning to see faith not as a set of answers, but as an ongoing conversation with what exceeds you, he said. And that you're ready to see how the conversation continues even after the words have been forgotten. We descended from the roof. As we left the monastery, I felt the silence stretch behind us, like a held breath finally released. My guide was waiting where I had left him, sitting on a rock and tossing small stones into the ravine. When he saw me, relief softened his features. You went very still, he said. Even from here, I could feel it. Did you ever think of becoming a monk? I asked impulsively. He laughed. No. I like food and songs too much. My grandfather says a faith that forgets to dance is sick. We began the long journey back to the world of roads and networks. The mountains slowly receded behind us, their white peaks bright against the sky. Days folded into weeks. My life became a series of thresholds. Airport gates, station platforms, border crossings. Between each, a cathedral. There was the underground city, discovered beneath a modern metropolis when workers digging a new subway tunnel broke through into a frescoed chamber. Officially, it was sealed off for preservation. Unofficially, the keeper and I slipped in one damp evening, our flashlights catching gleams of gold and pigment on walls that told stories in a dozen styles. Here, a serpent god devouring its tail circled a Christian saint. There, a wheel of reincarnation turned beneath a crescent moon. Generations of conquerors had painted over each other's symbols, only for the next to do the same, until the walls were a palimpsest of devotion and triumph, fear and hope. No single faith remained intact. The cathedral there was not to a god, but to the human urge to inscribe meaning on stone. There was the cavern beneath a glacier, reachable only by crawling through a tunnel of blue ice. The air inside was so cold it burned. At its heart lay a ring of standing stones, slick with ancient frost, their arrangement calculated to catch the pale light filtering through the ice above. People who had built it were long gone, their culture obliterated by shifting climate and migrating beasts. But on certain days of the year, the keeper told me, the light still aligned perfectly, pouring down in a column that turned the frozen air into liquid gold. A cathedral, he said to patients. There was a small island in a great lake, occupied now only by birds. Once, a temple there had housed a statue of a god of echoes and returns. Now, only the pedestal remained, its surface colonized by moss. When the wind blew just right between the rocks, the sound of the waves striking the shore resolved into something like chanting, a low, repetitive murmur that seemed to answer itself. Each place left an imprint on me, a texture, a mood, a question. Gradually, my sense of time shifted. The present felt less like a point on a line and more like a room in a vast building, connected by doorways to other rooms, some bright, some dark, some piled with forgotten furniture, others bare and echoing. One evening, as we sat on a hill overlooking a city whose lights spread out like spilled jewels, I asked the keeper, "Do the cathedrals ever end? Is there a last one?" "There is a last one for you," he said. "Time is long, your life is not. At some point, your body will say, 'Enough.'" "And for you," I ventured, "do they end for you?" He smiled in a way that made him look for a heartbeat, very tired. "I am not bound to time the way you are," he said, "but that does not mean I am free of it. I am an arrangement it has tried on. One of the ways it has chosen to speak to itself. When I am no longer needed, I will unravel. Something else will take my place." "That sounds lonely," I said. "Loneliness is just a name for a certain arrangement of attention," he replied. "When you're listening deeply, you're never truly alone." The last cathedral he showed me did not yet exist, or rather, it existed in more than one sense, folded into a knot of time I could only glimpse from the corner of my mind's eye. We met in a field on the outskirts of a sprawling city, under a sky lit not by stars, but by a dull orange haze. The air smelled of exhaust and distant rain. Construction cranes stood like skeletal fingers against the horizon. "There," the keeper said, pointing toward a cluster of unfinished towers. "Look." I looked. At first, I saw only the obvious: concrete pillars, steel girders, glass panels reflecting the murky sky. Then, as I let my gaze soften, other images began to seep through. A soaring hall of light and shadow, its walls lined not with stone carvings, but with screens, 1,000 small rectangles, each displaying a different pattern of color and motion. People moved through the hall, their faces lit from below by the pale glow of devices in their hands. Some knelt, not before statues, but before abstract diagrams, immersive projections of data streams and orbits. Others sat in silence, eyes closed, listening to a hum that seemed to rise from the very bones of the building. "This is a temple?" I asked, startled. "In one branch of possibility," the keeper said, "a sanctuary built for a faith that has not yet fully named itself. A faith in human continuity, perhaps, or in consciousness as a pattern that can be stored and reassembled. They will call it many things. Some will come here believing they can pray themselves into servers. Others will come simply because it is quiet and beautiful." In the vision, I saw a child standing at the center of the hall, looking up at a ceiling that displayed a simulation of the universe. Galaxies wheeling in slow, stately arcs around her, murmured debates about ethics and personhood, identity and replication, rose and fell like incense. "What happens to it?" I asked. "What happens to all temples?" the keeper said. "It flourishes, it divides, is fought over, defended, abandoned. Its screens go dark when the power grid fails. Its servers decay. Moisture seeps into its walls. Centuries later, someone stands where you're standing now, staring at a fragment of its architecture protruding from a hillside, and wonders what those people believed." My chest tightened. "Then why show it to me?" because you live nearer to this possibility than to those we have seen, he said gently. Because your choices, collective, not individual, will help determine whether this future faith is born gentle or cruel, inclusive or exclusive, attuned to the rest of the world, or sealed in its own hall of mirrors. And the cathedral, I whispered, will it be one too? Oh, yes, his eyes shone with a sober kind of joy. Time will remember it, as it remembers all the places where humans try to speak with what they did not fully understand. It will be one of the silent cathedrals someday, just as your era's screens and towers will be. I am showing you so that, when you walk through your own temples, be they churches or offices, data centers or shopping malls, you will feel the weight of that continuity. The vision faded. The half-built towers stood in the orange glow, skeletal and ordinary. I looked at the keeper. So, what am I meant to do with all this? I asked. I'm just one person. I've seen deserts and rivers, ice and stone, future screens and past walls. I've listened, like you said. But what now? Now, he said, you remember, when you feel tempted to declare that your own time is uniquely enlightened or uniquely doomed, you remember these cathedrals. When you hear people speak with contempt of those who believe differently, you recall the care with which they carved stone, the patience with which they aligned their devotions to stars or rivers or empty air. When you yourself feel the tug toward erasing what you once held dear, you remember the monastery and ask whether you are pruning or cutting your own roots. That doesn't sound like much, I said. It is not spectacular, he agreed, but it is how time stays honest with itself. It is also how you stay human in the face of your own impermanence. We walked in silence for a while, our footsteps crunching on gravel. The city's noise grew as we approached, a wash of engines and sirens, voices and vibrations. Somewhere a billboard flickered, its advertisement briefly glitching into a pattern of static that looked for an instant like a broken circle with a triangle at its heart. I stopped. That symbol, I said. I've seen it in every place we visited. Desert temple, river shrine, glacier cave, underground city. What is it? He followed my gaze, then smiled. An old sigil, one of time's little jokes perhaps, or one of the ways humans across ages and cultures have tried to draw the feeling of being between things. The circle broken, the point suspended in the center. Between what? I asked. Between before and after, he said, between knowing and not knowing, between worship and forgetting. The cathedrals all stand in such in-between places, so do you. You too, I said. He inclined his head. So do I. We reached a busy intersection. Pedestrians surged around us, each carrying a world of private rituals and unspoken beliefs. No one seemed to notice the thin, slightly out-of-place man at my side, or the way the light around him did not quite behave like the light around anyone else. This is where we part, for now, he said. Will I see you again? I asked. He considered. In a way, you see me whenever you stand in an old doorway and feel the weight of years, whenever you touch a relic and sense that you're not the first to love or fear it, whether I am there as a person, in this shape. He shrugged. Time will decide. I wanted to ask more about his origins, his nature, the mechanics of his appearances, but I had visited enough cathedrals by then to recognize that some doors should remain half open. Their power lay not in neat explanations, but in the spaces they left for wonder. Instead, I said, "Thank you for guiding me." "It is what I am arranged to do," he replied. Then softer, "And it has been pleasant. Not everyone who comes to these places listens as you have. Not everyone asks questions without demanding answers that fit in their pockets." He stepped back. The crowd flowed between us, a river of bodies. For an instant, his hat rose above the sea of heads like a small, dark boat. Then it was gone. I stood there in the heart of a living city, listening. Under the honk of horns and the buzz of electricity, I heard other sounds, the distant ring of a chisel on stone, the slap of river water against steps, the rasp of a brush scraping away pigment, the low chant of voices rising in a room lit by screens and stars. All of it was time, speaking in different registers. All of it was prayer, in a sense. Even the atheist's careful experiment, the skeptic's diligent question, the child's repetition of a rhyme she did not yet understand. Later, I would return to my work, framing what I had seen in words that could be printed, archived, argued over. Some readers would call it myth, others metaphor, others perhaps hallucination. That was all right. The cathedrals did not need belief. They had stone and water, ice and data, wind and light. They had the long, slow attention of time itself. But when I sat down to write, I began with a simple sentence, one that had grown in me over the miles and years. There are buildings that remember us better than we remember ourselves. From there, the stories unfolded, of deserts and rivers, monasteries and glaciers, underground cities and future halls. I wrote them not as instructions, but as invitations, not to worship, but to listen. Somewhere, in a temple whose roof had fallen centuries before I was born, dust stirred. In a drowned stairwell, a ripple passed through water, older than any of my words. In a mountain hall of empty shells, the air seemed, for a moment, to hold its breath. And in the great cathedral without walls, the slow, turning architecture of time itself, a note sounded, very small, but very clear, and went on ringing long after my pen lifted from the page.